Question number 24. So question number 24 wants you to solve a quadratic and a linear system, all right? So whenever you're solving a quadratic and a linear system, guys, all right, we must first identify which one's a quadratic and which one's a linear, all right? You don't need to, but it's good for you to be able to identify it, okay? So the quadratic is the equation that has the x squared, all right? So this is a quadratic, and the linear is the equation that does not have an x squared, okay? Because again, the general form for quadratic is y equal ax squared plus bx plus c, all right? So again, that's the general form for quadratic, and the general form for linear is y equal mx plus b, all right? So again, quadratic, linear, all right? So when solving this system, guys, you have to use the method called substitution, all right? The reason why you have to use a method called substitution is because it says y is equal to something for actually both of the equations. So you have to use substitution, all right? So what you're going to do, guys, is that you're going to replace this entire equation that we have for the quadratic for my y in the second equation. So again, we're going to replace this entire quadratic for the y here, all right? So instead of writing y in front of this equation, I would write x squared minus 2x minus 1 in front of this equal sign. So it would be equal to this equation, 3x minus 1. All right? So essentially, you set both equations equal to each other. All right? So now you're going to try to move everything to the same side. All right? So I'm going to move everything that's on the right to the left side, okay? So to do that, I will subtract 3x. Would I need to subtract 3x from x squared, negative 2x, or negative 1? From the negative 2x, because that's the like term. This will get canceled. And how do I move a negative 1 to the other side? I would add 1 to both sides. Would I add it to x squared, negative 2x, or negative 1? Yup, to the negative 1, because that's the like term. That's the other constant, all right? So now we're going to go ahead and calculate, because that cancels out. The x squared, you're going to bring it down because you're not adding or subtracting anything to it. I am subtracting 3x from negative 2x, which gives me negative 5x. I am adding 1 to negative 1, which will actually cancel out or leaves me with 0. All right? So, and everything here canceled out, so I was left with 0. All right? So now we need to factor. So again, now you're going to factor. All right. However, this right here might be difficult for you to try to factor or put into factored form. So what you're going to do, guys, is that you're going to look at each term and try to figure out what they have in common. All right. So if you realize both of them at least has x in common. So that means I can factor out x. Okay. So that's the only thing that they have in common. So I'm going to now write what's remaining inside of a parentheses. Okay. So when you're factoring out this x, it's like you're dividing each term by x. So here I have an x squared, which means technically I have two x's multiplied by each other. If I took one of them away, I'm left with only one x remaining. Okay? And then with a negative 5x, if I take this x away, if I factor it out, I'm only left with the negative 5. All right? So that's how you factor this equation right here, okay? So now you need to try to find your values of x, okay? So to find the value of x, you're going to go ahead and flip the signs of whatever you have inside of the parentheses, okay? So when I flip the sign here, I would have x is equal to positive 5. However, there's nothing to flip here. Whenever there's nothing to flip, you're going to call nothing 0, all right? So again, these are my two x values, all right, to this equation, okay? So now I need to find the y values that goes with them, okay? So to find the y values, I'm going to plug in each of these x values into my shortest equation, all right? Just like how we do other systems. Always plug it into the shortest equation, all right? So that would be the second one. I'm going to replace the x right here with parentheses 0. So I would have y equal 3. I replace the x with parentheses 0 minus 1. All right. So now we calculate. 3 multiplied by 0 is 0. and 0 minus 1 is negative 1. Alright, so that means our first solution, when x was 0, the y that went with it was negative 1. So again, guys, that's my first solution. Alright, so now I need to go ahead and find my next solution. So again, my first solution is 0, negative 1. So now let's find our next solution, guys. Okay, so now I'm going to plug in my 5 into that shortest equation. So I'm going to write y is equal to, I'm going to replace the x with parentheses what? Parentheses 5, alright? And then minus 1. So 3 multiplied by 5 is 15. 15 minus 1 is 14, alright? And now we have our second solution. When x was 5, the y that went with it was positive 14, alright? And that would be how you do it, alright? So let's try the next one, guys. All right. So again, guys, we have to use a method called substitution because it says y is equal to something. So I circle my first equation and I replace it for the y in my bottom equation. Okay. So now instead of writing y is equal to all of this, I'll write x squared plus 8x minus 20 is equal to this entire second equation. All right. So now I'm going to move everything to the same side. Good job. How do I move a negative 10 to the other side? I would add 10. Would I add 10 to x squared, 8x, or negative 20? Yep, to the negative 20 because that's a like term. And that cancels out. And how do I move a negative x to the other side? I would add x. Good job. Would I add it to x squared, 8x, or negative 20? To the 8x because that's the like term. Alright, and that gets canceled. So the x squared, I'm not adding or subtracting anything to it, so I bring it down. Here I am adding x to 8x. In front of this x is technically a positive 1, so 8x plus 1x will give me 9x's. Good job, guys. And negative 20, I am adding 10 to it. Negative 20 plus 10 gives me negative 10. Alright, because I'm adding to a negative, so I'm making it less negative, alright, but we had more negative, so it still end up giving a negative result, okay? So now, we're going to do what now? We're going to factor, okay? So when we factor, I'm going to write factored form, which is 2 pairs of parentheses, because this we can factor with no problem, alright? So what two variables, when you multiply them, gives you x squared, x and x? What numbers multiply to give you 10? 1 and 10, and then 2 times 5, okay? So now I need to find a pair that will add or subtract to give me a 9. Which pair do you think would work? Yep, the 1 and the 10, okay? So I put my 1 and my 10, right? It doesn't matter where you put the numbers. What matters is the signs. So now let's figure out the signs. Whenever you see a negative sign right here, you get a hint. That hint is that they'll have different signs, all right? So make sure you take that hint, guys, all right? When you see a negative here, it means different signs. If you saw a positive here, it would mean same signs, okay? So again, when it means different signs, that means one of them is going to be a positive and one is a negative. So let's see which one would be positive and which one would be negative. If the 1 was positive and the 10 was negative, 1 take away 10 is what? Negative 9. But did we want negative 9? No, we wanted a positive 9. Alright? So what if the 10 was positive and the 1 was negative? 10 minus 1 is positive 9. So that means the 10 needs to be positive and the 1 needs to be negative. Alright? So now we're going to go ahead and flip the signs. So we have two numbers we can flip. So when I flip a negative 1, I get a positive 1. And when I flip a positive 10, I get a negative 10. Alright? So those are my two x values. Now I need to find my y values. Okay? So now I'm going to replace these x values into my shortest equation for my x. Okay? So instead of writing x, I'm going to write parentheses 1. So I'm going to write y equal negative, all right, parentheses. And what's going to go inside of that parentheses? Yep, 1 minus 10. In front of this parentheses is also a negative 1. So negative 1 multiplied by positive 1 is negative 1. and you bring down that negative 10, negative 1 minus 10 is negative 11. And we have our first solution. When x was positive 1, the y that went with it was negative 11. All right, so that's my first solution. So let's find the next one, okay? So I'm going to rewrite the second equation, and I'm going to replace the x in that equation with negative 10. So I'll write negative 1 parentheses, and what's going to go inside? Negative 10, and then minus 10. Okay? So negative 1 multiplied by negative 10 is positive 10, and then you bring down that negative 10. 10 minus 10 is 0. So that means when x was negative 10, the y that went with it was 0. Okay? So again, guys, just like that.